Hey everybody, today I want to talk about one of the best Pokemon decks of all time, both from a deck building standpoint, a strategy standpoint, and a mirror match standpoint. And that's Gardevoir and Gallade from the 2008 season. Now, people's opinions on the 2008 season or format they vary quite a lot. Some people absolutely love the format because of the before mentioned strategy, deck building, and depth of the gameplay. Other people absolutely hate the 2008 format because it is completely revolving around the Gardevoir-Gallade deck that we're going to talk about today. This is probably one of the most dominant decks of all time. Now, the reason that I love the format so much is because of that depth, because of that strategy, and because of that gameplay. Now, I think a format with a wide variety of decks is great, but I also think that I think decks that involve a lot of strategy or formats that involve a lot of strategy and a lot of deck building and in-game decision making are always going to favor the better players. So today let's take a look at this deck, and I'm going to walk you through it and then walk you through some of the strategies in the mirror match and why it is such an in-depth game to play. So starting off here, the deck is going to be revolving around Gardevoir. And while Gardevoir is not the only attacker in the deck, the entire deck focuses around it. And what Gardevoir does is the Pokepower Telepass lets you use a supporter from your opponent's discard pile. This can be used on the same turn that you use your own. So essentially you're going to be able to play 2 supporters per turn. Now, if you have 2 Gardevoirs in play, you can still only use 1 Telepass. And then the attack Psychic Lock is going to do 3 energy, 60 damage, and it's going to stop your opponent from using Pokemon powers on their next turn. This essentially shuts off the main draw supporter, or the main draw Pokemon in the entire deck, or support Pokemon, which is going to be Claydol from Great Encounters. This also shuts off a lot of other things in the format, ideally like other Gardevoirs. Now, the thing that makes Psychic Lock so powerful is so much of the format is based around Claydol. And going along with that, if you play a higher count of, let's say, draw cards like Steven's Advice or TV Reporter, then Gardevoir can just take advantage of those as well. Now, Gardevoir by itself is probably manageable, but what makes the deck or gives the deck another layer of strength is going to be Gallade from Secret Wonders here as well, which Gallade does 60 damage, or Psychic Cut does 60 damage, and then you get to flip as many of your face-down prize cards as you like, and it does 20 damage, more damage for each additional prize card. Now, if you flip all your prize cards, you're going to do a total of, you can do up to 180 damage in one swing. Now, that knocks out absolutely everything in the format. So what makes the deck so strong is that no matter what your first threat is, Gallade is going to be able to knock it out. Now, that means that if you put all your time and investment into bringing something up, Gallade just knocks it out. You've basically wasted all this time while the Gardevoir player has invested next to nothing, and then they can just transition into a Psychic Lock, and you're going to struggle to set up after basically the Pokemon you put all your investment into is just knocked out. That is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. Now, going along with all of this, you have Scramble Energy in the format. And what Scramble Energy is if you're behind, then it counts as 3 energy. If you're ahead, it counts as 1 colorless energy, and it can only be attached to evolved Pokemon. Now, what adds another depth to this is there is a lot of back and forth on, do you take the first prize, do you not take the first prize, how does that all work? And one of the things is so let's say you send up Gardevoir, or you send up the first Gardevoir and you Psychic Lock, you take the first prize, then their turn, they just send up Gallade, flip 3 prizes, knock out your Gardevoir. Now, if you send up a second Gardevoir, they can just flip 3 more prizes and then knock out that Gardevoir. So there's a lot of strategy between turning scrambles on and off, which Pokemon to send up first, how to deal with Gallade in the matchup, and things like that. So let's go ahead. We'll start walking through the deck here. So first off, we play 3 Rolts from Secret Wonders. The reason that we play 3 copies of this Rolts is we do get the 10 additional hit points, and it's only a plus 10 weakness. Smack, solid 10, and then Confuse Ray, you get that 50-50 shot at confusion. We do play one copy of Rolts from Dragon Frontier for a couple of different reasons here. You have Auto Hypnosis, and then Psychic Boom is going to do 10 damage times the number of energy attached to the defending Pokemon. So for a single Psychic, you could hit an opposing Gardevoir for 60 damage if they was fully powered. You could hit it for 60 damage with weakness. Now, this essentially means that if you, let's say, went up and went Psychic Lock, they knock you out, you could knock them out with the Rolts and a Psychic Energy. That's not ideal, but it is a nice option to have. Now, over the course of the year in the format, you saw the Rolts count switch around a little bit. Some people just went 4 straight Dragon Frontiers Rolts. Some just went with 4 copies of the Secret Wonders Rolts. But essentially, I would say this is the correct split and what most of the good players opted for at the end of the season. 2 copies of Kirlia. Kirlia is not anything special. Psychic Research lets you search your discard pile for a supporter. It gave you a little, and the attack is used as the effect. So it's adds a little bit of consistency, but if you decide to going Psychic Research with Kirlia is a good idea, you're probably in a pretty bad spot. Telekinesis snipes something on the bench for 40 damage. Now, this is actually pretty strong, or situationally can be strong. It's not an attack that comes up very often, but I always do like decks that have some sort of built-in option to attack the bench, just in case you just get really close to knocking something out and you're just not quite able to get there. It'll help you steal a prize later on in the game. Gardevoir, like we talked about, with Telepath, Psychic Lock. We do play 3 copies of the Gardevoir just because the entire deck is built on around it. You want to make sure that you are seeing early Gardevoirs, and you want to make sure that you're not prizing too many of them. Or if you prize one, it's not going to kill you. Same thing with the Glade. We play 2 copies of Glade. Most games you're only going to need 1 Glade, but we do run that extra copy just to make sure that we don't prize it. It is so important to have in nearly every single matchup. We play 1 copy of Gardevoir Level X. Gardevoir Level X does a couple of different things. First off, it adds 10 HP. Now, this can be super relevant, or I'm sorry, it adds 20 HP from the base Gardevoir. And this can be super relevant because if you are playing against your opponent here and they say you Psychic Lock for 60, even though it's doubled instead of just plus 30, they're only going to hit you for 120 damage, which means they're going to be 10 shy of knocking you out. So you can time the Level X drop really well to making sure that you're denying your opponent that knockout. And then choose the lowest HP Pokemon in play and knock it out. So it's a free prize card for 2 Psychic Energies. Now, there's a couple different strategies you can use with this, but essentially, it's how a lot of Gardevoir players would try to close out the game, is just going bring down. And you can even put yourself in situations where you might be able to rush the opponent and bring down for the last 2 or 3 prizes. These are not very common situations, but it's one more layer of the matchup and the mirror match that you just constantly have to kind of be aware of and be aware of how you're playing. 2 Baltoy, 2 Claydol. Claydol, I would say by the time Nationals and Worlds rolled around, Claydol was the standard for the deck. Through City, States, and Regionals, the deck actually opted to play a Furret line, a 4-3 Furret, and that was just for consistency, being able to search out your Gardevoirs, your Scramble Energies, etc. And then just the consistent draw power from Claydol proved to be a little bit better. Jason Klaczynski even commented on this. He won a Regionals with the Gardevoir Furret variant, and then said heading into Nationals and Worlds that he tested the Claydol variant very heavily, and he found that Claydol was slightly better, but only slightly better than the Furret variant. 1 Grimer, 1 Muck. What makes Muck so strong is its Pokebody Toxic Sludge. And note, it's a Pokebody and not Pokemon Power, so Psychic Lock will not shut it off. And what Toxic Sludge says is if you check at the end of your turn and the end of your opponent's turn, and if your opponent's active Pokemon has a Grass Energy attached to him, then that Pokemon is poisoned. Now, Grass Energy might not seem that common, but every major deck in the format played either Double Rainbow Energy or Scramble Energy, which will count as Grass and in turn make your opponent's active Pokemon poisoned. Now, that 10 damage comes into play, but along with that, it's Poison, which is a special condition which shuts off both things like Telepass and Teleportation. So, if you, let's say your opponent brings up a Gardevoir, they go Psychic Lock, the end of their turn, they're poisoned, they take 10, they're down to 100. You come up, go Psychic Lock to them for 60 plus 30 is going to be 90. Plus the 10 they already have is 100. Then at the end of your turn, they're going to get knocked out from the poison damage. The math with Muck in this format, regardless if you're playing a mirror match or against Empoleon or any other big deck in the format, is just so unbelievably strong. And that's why I opt to play a 1-1 Muck in this deck over a 101 Dusknoir line. The attack is also pretty good. It confuses them, and they can't retreat during your opponent's next turn. This is situationally good. Every big deck in the format is going to play Warp Point, but sometimes you can catch them with that. And even if they Warp Point out of it, they still are not actually hitting the Muck. They're hitting whatever you Warp Point into. Jirachi EX. Now, Jirachi also adds another layer to the mirror and to the deck here, because it's 90 HP, and the body says if your opponent has any Stage 2 Pokemon or Pokemon EX in play, that you reduce Jirachi's attacks by 1 colorless energy. And what makes this so crazy is that, let's say your opponent goes on they get an amazing start and they go Rare Candy Gardevoir on their first turn. They're all excited, they get to use 2 Sporters a turn to set up, but they trigger Jirachi, which means that 1 Roseanne's Research, you can grab Jirachi and Psychic Energy, and you go Shield Beam, which will completely shut them down. And if they put everything into getting that first Gardevoir out, they might not have that strong of a hand to draw out of the Shield Beam lock. On top of that, if let's say your opponent has an amazing start and they are attacking, let's say, second turn of the game with Gardevoir, and this is dreaded. And if you don't play Jirachi, you'll probably lose from this point on, unless your hand is really good, is you can go Jirachi, hit them for 60, because you're going to do 30 plus weakness. They hit you, you Shield Beam again, knock them out. Now, even if they bring something else up, let's say they bring up a second Gardevoir, second Glade, you knock out Jirachi, all of a sudden you're giving up 2 prize cards. So you've taken 1 prize card, you're down to 5, they knock out Jirachi, they're down to 4, your Scramble Energy becomes active. Glade can still flip enough prizes to knock out whatever your opponent brought up to knock out the Jirachi. So it adds just another back and forth to the mirror match, and another option, or it gives the deck an option if your opponent has a really strong, insane start. And that's one of the things that I find so, I guess, interesting about this mirror match and make it so much fun to play is it's not like one person gets this unbelievable start and they just steamroll the opponent. There is options built into the deck that are relatively easy to get out that are going to counter those really strong starts from your opponent. And then 1 Jolteon Star. You have to play some sort of damage modifier. Jolteon Star I think is generally accepted as the most common. Heading into Worlds that year, you would see Strength Charm, Absol EX. Drew Holden finished second at Nationals playing Absol EX. And then Jolteon Star. Jolteon Star, the first I saw was John Kettler played 1 and the Grinders, and I was strongly considering it for Worlds as well. Jason Klaczynski opted to play 1, obviously, in his Worlds winning list. But this was something that I would say came out or kind of became well known basically the night before Worlds or the day before Worlds. And what makes Jolteon better, in my opinion, than other options is it is searchable, and it creates a damage counter out of thin air. And that's not something that Absol can do, and it's not something, and Strength Charm's not searchable. And where that comes into play is, let's say your opponent has Glade active, they use Psychic Cut, take the first prize, you can bring up your Gardevoir, and even if you have the Scramble and the Lake Boundary, you're only going to hit him for 120. You need to find that extra 10 damage somehow, and that's where you're either going to have Jolteon or you're going to have Muck. And you need one of those two to find that additional 10 damage here. Next up is 1 Chatot. Now, up until this point, I would say even in the history of the game, you saw most decks devote 4 spots to starters. You saw Dunsparce in 2004, Jirachi and Dunsparce were very common in 2005, Jirachi, Holin's Cast Form, etc., 2006, Holin's Cast Form, 2007. And then in 2008, with the release of Call Energy, what you saw a lot of decks opt to do is they'll play 4 Call Energy and then a single copy of Chatot. So if you opened with Call and you had a bad hand, you could get that Chatot out. But let's say you had a stronger hand, it doesn't slow down your momentum. So let's say you start Rolls, Call Energy, you can grab Baltoy, another roll, it's Baltoy Grimer, whatever. And then you can, next turn, Rare Candy Gardevoir, Kirlia, Double Rainbow, etc. And just continue that momentum instead of having to waste time and energy to power up a starter like Dunsparce to go strike and run. It doesn't put you behind, it just starts pushing you forward. Now, a couple other interesting things about Chatot. One is it's got free retreat here, and the Mimic attack lets you shuffle your hand into your deck and draw how many cards your opponent has. So there's an element of strategy there too about your opponent wanting to keeping their hand size low. And then as far as Mimic goes, Mimic gets around Psychic Lock. So do you waste that, or do you take that turn, your opponent gets a quick Gardevoir? Do you take that turn to bring up Chatot, go Mimic, and then from the opponent's standpoint, if they have a Double Rainbow attached, do they want to knock out Chatot? Do they want to leave Chatot with 10 hit points remaining to basically remove any sort of bring down option from the opponent? There's a lot of little elements there as well. Moving to the supporter lineup for Roseanne's Research, just a great consistency card, searches out your basic energy and searches out your basic Pokemon. Very essential to getting out of bad starts with cards like Chatot, or if your opponent gets a quick start with cards like Jirachi, searches out your Baltoys, etc. Absolute staple at 4 here. Now, I played 4 BB Search and only 1 Celio's Network. You saw different elements of these counts and different numbers. Usually you'd see anywhere from 4 to 7, and you'd see the BB's and Celio's counts vary. The reason that I went with 4 and 1 here is BB's lets you search out the Jirachi EX, which I think is very important. And 2, it lets you put a card from your hand back into your deck. This means that you get to draw an additional card off of Claydol's Cosmic Power. Now, the downside of that is obviously you have to put a card back in your deck. And the number of times where that becomes impactful, as far as, man, I don't have a card to put back, is negligible. Incredibly, incredibly small. I would say much smaller than the odds of you getting an additional draw off Cosmic Power. I think putting one card you don't want from your hand back into your deck to draw one additional random card from your deck is a pretty big swing. Now, the downside to this, and you saw Jason flip them because he ran the 4 Celios and then the lower count of BBs, is the fact that if you are drawing dead, the last thing you want to do is put another dead card back into your deck. So let's say we got a bad hand, our opponent's going Psychic Lock, we're going to BB Search, sending Jolteon Star back in. Now, out of our deck, there is one additional bad card in that deck that we don't want to draw. Now, that's negligible, because maybe we got 30 cards on our deck, 35. So you're talking a 1 in 30, 1 in 35 chance of drawing that Jolteon Star back. But basically, all of these little things, they're all negligible things. It's just, where do you want to take your disadvantage or advantage? And like I said, this may all seem minor, but in the grand scheme of things, these are very important little decisions to think about. 4 copies of Rare Candy. Even though we only play 1 Stage 2 line in here, it is essential that we're able to get Gardevoirs and Glades when we need them, see them early, see them often, and playing the 4 copies of Rare Candies, just make sure that we can do that. 2 copies of Lake Boundary. Lake Boundary changes all weakness to ×2. Once again, this adds a very, very interesting dynamic to the mirror. Being able to make Gardevoir weak to Psychic. So let's say your opponent sends up the first Gardevoir, they Psychic Lock, knockout. You can send up your Gardevoir, Lake Boundary, Scramble Energy, knock out their Gardevoir. And once again, that's one of the things that I think makes this mirror match so strategic and so interesting and so much fun to play, is it's not always a good idea to take a lead in the game. And you really have to think, do you want to pull ahead in prizes? And what does that mean if you do? Or if you do pull ahead in prizes, because obviously you got to take 6 prizes to win, how do you want to do it? Do you want to send up your first Gardevoir? Do you want to send up Glade? Do you want to do it with Jirachi? There is always a risk-reward for every decision you make in this game, or in this mirror match. And I wish the game today had more of that. I wish there was more penalties for taking the first prize. I wish there was more thought process in, is taking a prize a good idea? But I digress. And then obviously in the mirror match too, if you do put down Lake Boundary, then your opponent has access to it too. How does that affect your game? 2 copies of Windstorm. Cessation Crystal and Crystal Beach were both very, very popular in this format. Windstorm lets you counter them. It also lets you counter opposing lake boundaries. You can also play down your own lake boundary and then use Windstorm on it to draw additional cards off play doll, have fewer dead cards in your deck. There's just a lot of little things with stuff like that. 2 copies of Team Galactic's Wager. And this card literally decides games, and it is one of the most strategic and one of the most infuriating cards I have ever seen in my entire life. I would much rather prefer just a straight judge to 4 or an N, but we've got Team Galactic's Wager. And what that says is you and your opponent play a game of rock, paper, scissors. The winner draws 6 cards, the loser draws 3. And it's almost guaranteed to be followed up by a Psychic Lock. The difference between 3 and 6 cards is astronomical. Game deciding. That regionals that Jason won this year I mentioned, I lost him in the finals. Based almost entirely off Team Galactic's wagers. He ended up winning, I think, about 70% of the wagers. Call it strategy, call it luck, call it whatever, but that's what decided our match. And there is so much, people are like, well, it's just rock, paper, scissors. What's so special about that? There is so much thought process and strategies to it. Rock, paper, scissors has their own world championships. And you could do a lot of research just on rock, paper, scissors. I remember I spent several hours reading about strategies of rock, paper, scissors just in preparation for nationals and worlds that year after I had lost to Jason in that finals. And strategically speaking, scissors wins out by about 2 or 3 percentage points. It's considered to be favorable. Men are strategically more likely to choose rock than women are because they see a rock as a source of strength and power and aggression. On the same note, too, if somebody goes really fast, like if they're just like bam, 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 they have less time to change their hand motion. So if you see somebody just go bam, 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 they're considerably more likely to stay as rock versus switch to something last minute instead of going like, it's... So there's a strategy thing there, too. One of the things that did not come out until Worlds, and I wish I would have known, was that you cannot make it random. You can't flip coin, you can't roll a dice, you can't do high roll, anything like that. What you can do is use cards, and you can have, like, let's say an energy that says rock on it, energy that says paper, and energy that says scissors, or whatever, and then you could choose which card you wanted, set it face down, your opponent says, all right, I choose rock, you flip over yours. You cannot shuffle them, you can't do the... and then randomly choose one. It has to be an active decision on your part. But just the sheer volume of strategy that goes into a single Team Galactic's Wager is absolutely insane. Now, I would say at the time, I think it was actually more common to play 3 or even 4 wagers. Jason had opted to play 2, and I think 2 is correct. It's an option you want in the deck, but at the exact same time, it's not always the best supporter for the situation, especially in mirror matches. And on top of that, too, as soon as you play wager, your opponent is always going to have access to it through telepaths, barring the fact if you're psychic locking them, turning off their powers. But if they have an active turn with powers, they'll have access to Team Galactic's Wager. 2 copies of Warp Point. Warp Point just gives you a switching option in the deck, allows you to take easy prizes off the bench. And it also acts as a pseudo cessation crystal counter, allowing you to switch their Pokemon at the active spot to be able to use powers for a turn. And when you have cards like Claydol and Gardevoir, just a single turn with powers might give you that time to find a Windstorm or to find the cards that you need to get out of whatever situation you're in. 2 Steven's Advice. Straight draw cards were not incredibly popular in this format because you did not want to give your opponent access to telepaths. So if you go telepath Stevens to draw, or if you want Steven's Advice to draw 3 or 4, anytime your opponent had access to powers for the rest of the game, they're going to be able to telepath your Stevens, probably for 4, 5, 6 cards. So if you're playing Steven's Advice, it's incredibly important that you are ensuring that you're going to be able to follow it up with the Psychic Lock and not give your opponent access to just those draw cards or have that huge draw support every single turn through telepaths. 1 Celios Network, in conjunction with the BBs, this is a total of 5 outs. Play search cards. I play 1 copy of Night Maintenance. This gives you a little bit more utility, gives you more access to energy, or Gardevoir-Gallade, Gardevoir level X, Jirachi X, whatever you need. It gets knocked out, you can send it back to the deck. Most decks at the time played one copy of Night Maintenance. You can also just opt to be a little bit riskier and just play a second copy of Celios here. I think that's perfectly fine, but it does require a lot more. You just got to play a lot more carefully because you do not have that Pokemon Recovery card. The energy lineup, we play 4 Double Rainbow Energy. This is Double Rainbow Energy. Works with about everything in the deck and covers both the Psychic requirements for Gardevoir and then the Sonic Blade requirement for Glade as well. It also lets us attack with Gardevoir level X, Claydol in random situations, and then of course Muck in random situations as well. 4 copies of Call Energy. Provides a lot of consistency for the deck. Also works well with all of the colorless requirements in the deck as well here. 3 Scramble Energies. You did see some different variations of the deck. Current Hill made top 4 in the, I think, juniors or seniors division by playing 3 copies of Jirachi EX and then 4 Scramble Energy, going very heavily on getting that Jirachi EX knocked out first, allowing him to follow up with some strong Scramble plays. 3 Psychic Energy. 3 Psychic seems low, but this is pretty heavily offset with the requirements of with help of Double Rainbow Energy and of course Scramble Energy. And then 1 Cyclone Energy. This was a tech I stole from Jason as well. It played well in Jason's deck because he also played a Dusknoir, so he'd be able to Cyclone the active back and then Dark Palm it back to the deck. I like Cyclone Energy for a couple of different reasons. One, if they try to stall with something like a Chatot or a Jolteon Star, it allows me to push it back to the bench, ideally sending up something they don't want to. And it also acts as a pseudo cessation crystal counter. So while we do run 2 Windstorm, we also have access to 2 Warpoint and a Cyclone Energy to help us get powers for a turn. And when you're playing a deck as strong as Gardevoir-Gallade, that 1 turn with power should be enough to get you back into that game. Alright, so that goes ahead and wraps up the deck profile. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you're looking for a fun, strategic, and very in-depth gameplay deck to play with your friends, I can't recommend the Gardevoir-Gallade Mirror Match enough. It is just absolutely outstanding, and it is not a beginner's deck by any means, but it is a ton of fun to play, and I really suggest you give it a try. If you like this video and you want to see more content like this in the future, please like and subscribe to the channel, and of course, I hope to see you in the next video.